It's great to have a session like this, though, because normally we're used to talking about data protection in the context of feeling like we're the Grim Reaper, the bearer of bad news, always being negative. So it's nice to see a title to a session called Privacy as a Business Asset and as a Business Driver. Now, you can defer your judgment on that until the end of the session, and you can decide whether you think it is a business asset and a business driver. My name is Paul Avery. I'm a partner in McCampus Gerald in Dublin. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm Irish as well. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the panel, who have a much more difficult job than I have this afternoon, and we're going to give you some expert guidance. So we've got two companies here. We've got HelloDPO, and we've also got Palantir. So my colleagues from HelloDPO are Alison, Deighton, and Jenai, Nissim, and they're directors. HelloDPO is a data privacy law firm based in the UK, and of great interest to me as well is they've also got a DPO consulting arm in Ireland. I'm suspecting that's slightly Brexit-proofing things as well.
Maybe, yeah.
That's the only time I'm going to use the word Brexit in this session. They provide outsourced DPO services and legal advice on all things privacy related. They've just launched an online training package for data protection and GDPR, including one for law firms. Because we in law firms are great at saying, do as I say, don't do as I do. And I believe Jenai is also a yoga instructor, which is clearly needed when you've got all of that stress from
advising. But no one's got their maps or their equipment, I noticed. Jane, never mind.
There's yoga sessions after this event. So from a Palantir perspective, we've also got John Grant and Josh Zweig, and I hope I am pronouncing the names correctly, so apologies if I haven't. They're members of the Palantir Technologies Privacy and Civil Liberties Engineering team. And Palantir Technologies has built two data analytics platforms, Gotham and Foundry, that are used by customers all over the world to integrate their data, develop insights from the analysis of that data, and apply effective data governance policies. So in this session, what we're going to look at is we're going to make or try to see how privacy can be made a business asset and a business driver. And we're going to start with a little role play, just to liven things up. So I've been told to tell you that they're not guaranteeing acting ability. Personally, I heard it's Oscar-winning performances, so I'm very excited about all of this. So imagine the scene. Alison is the newly appointed DPO at FIG, which we're calling FinTech is Great. It's a FinTech company that offers consumers product comparison services, and that's also looking into how it can expand its services through exploiting open banking opportunities. So Alison, in her role as a DPO, she's decided to set up a regular data governance strategy meeting to get key stakeholders together to discuss data issues. And what we're going to witness is the first meeting of those stakeholders. So in addition to Alison as the DPO, we've also got John, who's the Chief Product Officer. We've got Josh, who's the CEO. And we've got Jenai, who's the Marketing Director. So they've all got slightly different perspectives on the world. So over to you.
Thank you. Well, hello everybody. Thank you very much for coming along to our inaugural Data Governance Strategy meeting. I haven't met all of you personally yet, so I thought I would introduce myself. I'm the Data Protection Officer, newly appointed at FIG, which I'm hugely excited about. The purpose of this meeting, just to set the scene, is to try to make sure we all have good oversight of what our data objectives are, and hopefully try to build some consensus amongst us as to what we want our privacy programme to look like, and make sure we're all sort of working in the same direction. So for this inaugural meeting, I thought we would all perhaps give our objectives of what we're trying to achieve with data, what we're worried about from a data perspective, so that we can then build a discussion from that point. I'm happy to kick off to do that introduction first of all for myself. So just to give you a bit of background, as a data protection officer under GDPR, I have certain statutory duties. So I have to make sure the business knows what the laws are, that employees understand their obligations. I have to make sure there's good training and awareness in place across the business. I need to monitor compliance with laws and with policies. I have an obligation and a duty to cooperate with supervisory authorities. So if we have a breach or some sort of query from a regulator, I have to make sure we're cooperating in a transparent manner with the regulator. I also have to advise on data protection impact assessments, make sure we're doing those in the right way. So I have to have a good understanding of all the business activities and where there might be high risk processing going on so that I can make sure you all get the right advice. So from my perspective, one of my key objectives is to make sure we can meet all of those statutory duties. So for me personally as the DPO, but also as a company, we need to make sure we can show that your data protection officer has the right tools in place to make sure I can fulfill those duties. So that's one of my key objectives. And the second one is to try to build a privacy program that really works for everybody, that takes account of everybody's objectives, everybody's different business drivers, and that doesn't just tick all the compliance boxes, because that's one part of it, but really we want everybody to be buying into what privacy is about and what we're going to achieve as an organisation. So those are my key objectives. Happy to hand over to you, Josh.
Yes, well, thanks for calling the meeting, Alison, and it's a pleasure to meet you as well. So as far as opportunities, I mean, I see a world of opportunities for how we can be using our data and using it better. So my main targets as the chief executive are one, to drive up our customer numbers. I see a lot of opportunities there, and two, to increase profitability as well. Any way we can be using our data to achieve these goals, we should be. We shouldn't be getting in our data scientist way on that one. Profitability is certainly key, so any sort of very costly compliance exercise, while maybe sometimes necessary, we should not be taking any sort of gold-plated approaches and being really over the top about it. And as far as risks to the latter half of your point, certainly data breaches are a big risk for us, and especially as we think about raising money and attracting investor interest, making sure everything is buttoned up from a security standpoint is going to be paramountly important.
Okay, thank you. John, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm the Chief Product Officer. I'm ridiculously overdressed for this. I went to bed last night at 4 a.m. I had nothing to eat today but peanut M&Ms and a Red Bull. My job is to get the product to work. It has to do what it says on the box. That's my primary mission, which means give consumers the best possible experience and make sure that when they click a button, it does what it's supposed to do. And I want to minimize the number of clicks. I want them to come back to the product and use it so that we can continue to work and build out the product and make money and meet our goals as a company. My code base is large and complex and has many contributors who are all kinds of different styles of working. So I want to foster an environment that encourages creativity and innovation, and sends a message that it's okay to fail, because that's how it's done. If an engineer tried something bold and aimed at creating a better product, that's a good thing. Run fast and break things is a motto of a company that we probably would envy. And I therefore do not want process. I don't want 100 people. There's a general framework for how a product is designed, but I don't have time or inclination for a whole bunch of checkpoints and lawyers checking code. And I want to stay with innovative products in the pipeline. Open banking gives us lots of opportunities, but I really don't want to be, again, hindered by cumbersome compliance reviews. I also need people. I am always understaffed. I need high-level technical talent. But I also, if I have high-level technical talent, that means they can leave and get a job anywhere else, possibly for more money. So I need to make sure they're happy.
Okay, understood.
Hi.
Jenai.
Hi, Josh, John. How are you doing? Great.
Good to see you again.
Welcome, Alison. I just probably should set the tone. I mean, it's great that you've come in and everything else, but as you can see, the business is quite innovative. We're growing, and a lot of red tape's not really what we're looking for. We want to be compliant, but not gold plate everything. So probably best to just bear that in mind in your new role. But it's great to have you here anyway. I'm the marketing director. I've worked here for a number of years now. I know the teams really well, and it's great. We have a lot of talent, which is fantastic. My team has really challenging targets for sales, so we don't want anything that is not. If everybody else is doing it in the industry, it's okay. So we don't want the best of everything. We just want to do whatever we need to do to tick boxes and get through. Our main priority over the past 12 months has been really to convert people that have been opening accounts or customers that have or individuals that had interaction with us to, to get them to come back, and so we can sell products to them. We run so many marketing campaigns, SMS, email, ad tech, which is great. I heard there's a bit of a report out there, but I don't really agree with it. We also do lots of refer a friend activities, which is really great for us, because we get data from people, just word of mouth, which is brilliant. In fact, everyone here, if you want to give us your details, that's fine. We're also starting to look at lead generation partners as well. And I've heard about this amazing company called Leads Are Us. Apparently, their data source is amazing. They can tell everything about somebody. And we're going to start using that, start targeting our customers. Unfortunately, we've always always had an opt-out journey for marketing consents, and we don't really want to move to opt-in. When we've tried this in the past, I've had other DPOs come in, and hopefully it lasts a bit longer. And they've said to us, maybe you should move for opt-in, but I don't really buy into the transparency thing. I think times are changing. We've lost a lot of business, but we go with it for a while. But when the figures drop off, John gets upset, and then Josh is on the phone. So we are a business at the end of the day. I do, however, have a little bit of concern over cookies because it's not really clear to us about how we're using those cookies, despite what I said about the ad tech report. So it'd be good to get a bit of an idea, because clearly you've got a lot of experience. So, but welcome to the team.
Great, thank you.
So at this stage, Alison is feeling very lonely. She's also wondering, has she taken the right job in coming into this organisation? But there's a lot of familiar themes here, and there's a lot of understandable competing pressures and competing interests. So we're going to look at some case studies which are hopefully going to try to rationalise those competing pressures and competing interests, and see if we can come up with something that is still GDPR and e-privacy compliant, but in a solution-focused and pragmatic way. And obviously we're going to have to consider things like fair and transparent processing, identifying a lawful basis, data minimisation, opt-ins or opt-outs, and also whether DPIAs or maybe a lesser form of privacy impact assessment is required. And hopefully by the end of the session, Alison won't be feeling like she has walked into a room with having walked in with something on the bottom of her shoe, but it'll all be very positive. So over to you guys again.
I'll kick it off. Thanks. So I think that the tension we just felt in that role play was A, palpable, but B, unfortunately reflects reality very, very much, I think. And I think that that tension is largely premised on what I think is kind of a false understanding of what everyone else in the room does. So I kind of see the source of the tension here as the product and the operations people and the marketing people wanting to do everything they can with data, wanting to derive the most they can out of it. And I think largely we think that they're doing some very highly complex, difficult analytical tasks for which we need the best engineers in the world, and certainly we have them, and they're extremely expensive. But with that, I think we have this situation occur where we kind of tell the compliance and the privacy people to just stay out of the way, which is quite unfortunate. But I think this premise on a bit of a false understanding of what is actually happening here. So to make that point, a quick story about, as an engineer myself, what I think is kind of actually happening in the engineering and more data analytical focused parts of the organization. So 6 months ago, in December 2018, Yangping Huang, who's a researcher down at Google Brain here in London, released a state-of-the-art algorithm with some of his co-authors. State-of-the-art meaning it was the best algorithm to ever do the task that it was set out to do. And it was on this data set called CFAR10, which is an extremely well-studied benchmarking data set for image classification. So Dr. Huang did an interesting thing when he released this research in a blog post, or as we call it in the computer science community, the academic literature. And what he did was release the code with it. And this is an incredibly common thing. And basically what this means is that as engineers in either John or Jenai's part of the business, what I get to do is immediately the data state-of-the-art research gets put out without basically lifting a finger. I get to use it to deploy it around the business. So that's a very interesting thing. And I think that when we think that, we often think that what is actually happening is that there are all these highly analytical tasks that are the bottleneck in what our data analysts can do, I think we're missing two very important parts of the problem here, which is A, getting the data, and B, getting the data in the right shape. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I think that means in a minute or two. But the actual analytical tasks, I think, are quite a bit easier because we get so much of them for free. And this kind of delineates between what I think of as the business problem and the academic problems of machine learning. So in the academic problem of machine learning, when you're actually coming up with the analytical tasks, you get to assume away coming up with all the data. But in the industry, and this is a problem that we work on solving a lot at Palantir, is the problem in some ways, is how do you get the data, and how can you be sure that the data is correct when you get it, and how can you make sure it represents what you actually think it represents? So if that is the actual difficult task that John and Jenai's engineers are facing, that sounds a little more like the task that us as privacy and compliance people are pretty good at handling. It's this data management task. What good principles of good data governance can we deploy? And Paul, please let me know when I'm going towards time.
You're doing fine so far.
Good. So there are a few. There's this website called Kaggle, and it's a website where the machine learning community kind of comes together and shares research, algorithms, data, all these kinds of things. And they did a survey last year where they found that the top 3 barriers that people face at work doing the data analysis is not the kind of thing that we feel like we need the privacy and compliance people to stay out of the way for. What they are is, 1, acquiring the data from around the organization, 2, dealing with dirty data, which is what I mean by getting it in the right shape, and 3 is not spending enough time with subject matter experts on the data to understand it. So these problems sound kind of like the ones that we care about ourselves once we've kind of pulled back the curtain on what the engineers are actually doing here. So if we think about this as a bit of a data management problem, I think that we have a lot more in common in the expertise that we can provide. And I'll just give 2 examples on each of the getting the data problem and getting the data in the right shape problem, which I think can help get us towards some solutions as well and demonstrate this new framing of the problem that I think can be really helpful for all of us. So 1 is the right data problems. How do we actually get the right data? Well, when you say compliance people stay out of my way and let's just give the analysts all of the data that they possibly can, there are actually a lot of really bad results that come out of that. 1 is this overload problem. It's extremely hard to reason about so much data and so much noisy data when you're trying to solve some sort of problem. And what actually happens in most of these cases is you come to some extremely inconsequential solutions as a result of it because you just have too much data to reason about. So that Kaggle survey I was talking about, this is a survey by machine learning people, and one of the top 3 insights that they said came out of that survey for them was that PhDs make more than masters candidates in the industry. I'm just like, I don't think I needed the survey to figure that one out. And it's because when you're just operating with too much data, it's too hard to do. So what data scientists have kind of done is this inversion of the scientific method. So instead of saying, what do I want to figure out, what do I want to learn, what have I potentially observed, and let me run some experiments, they have all sorts of data at their disposal, and they say, what can I learn from it? That's not really the right way to frame the problem. A much more healthy way to frame the problem is one in which we work with leadership, by the way. That survey, one of the other big problems was that people didn't feel like they could get buy-in from leadership in what they were doing. So if instead we actually think about the kind of data that we should be collecting a priori and then design experiments with very carefully specified ways to collect the data and decide what we should do with it, we'll actually come to much better outcomes. And I'm afraid I'm about running over my time.
But that's very helpful because it highlights that data minimization and collecting the data the right way can actually be a good thing.
So we've improved the organization. Let's improve the people at the organization. I'm going to run in the interest of time. I won't necessarily back up all of these statements, but feel free to pigeonhole me afterwards if you want, or plug, since it's published here, the Consumer Privacy Handbook, which Cambridge University Press published last year, actually has an article that my colleague and I wrote on this very topic. So quickly, our argument on why talent or why privacy is a driver for getting better talent. Consumers don't often respond to privacy debacles at organizations, right? You see these huge headlines. They get us all excited in the data protection community, but consumers keep going back. Even Facebook, which would seem to be on the ropes, is not exactly in danger of failing anytime soon over these high-profile issues. But companies like Facebook, Apple, etc., still spend a significant amount of time and capital, real and political, to fight for privacy. Apple fighting the FBI on the San Bernardino iPhones, Microsoft Ireland case, all of these cases going on, they're expending a lot of effort on this. So this could be altruistic. This could be just we genuinely care about privacy. But that always doesn't explain other aspects of their business models that are a little less concerned about privacy. So what is the reason for this? And what we argue is that tech companies are more and more defining themselves, and I'm speaking for tech here because that's what I work in, but there are obviously contractual links between tech and other industries that might play into this. But tech companies are more and more defining themselves as mission-driven, connect the world. Palantir defines it, I'll go into that in a minute. Palantir defines itself as mission-driven rather than wholly profit-driven, right? They're doing something. People are coming to work in these places because they want to do something. They want to accomplish something, make the world a better place. And so high-quality employees who have their choice of employers, I think, are drawn to companies in part based on mission and assessment of what is good in the world. And that makes sense if you think that most of them are coming from largely liberal, progressive institutions, and they are going to be attracted by this. So into a more specific case study, I'll use Palantir as the example here. What does that mean for an organization? Well, so Palantir, we define our mission as Save the Shire, because it's a bunch of nerds, which is, Palantir comes from Lord of the Rings, so it makes sense. For those who are not intimately familiar with Lord of the Rings, you could also, the CEO has defined it as making the institutions of the world work the way they're supposed to work for everyone. And a core component of that, and the reason we have a team of 15 people working on this, is that the product fails if it does not also protect privacy and civil liberties in the course of being used, right? So we're thinking about, as we think about who we work with and how we build it, we think about, can it be used in a way that protects privacy and civil liberties? So immediately the data protection questions, the privacy and civil liberties questions are a core part of the company mission. And so people are defining sort of their what their work is, their work as also advancing these goals. So that again aligns the data protection officer with what everybody else is doing. So what do you need to do that? What does your data protection organization need to look like to do that? Employees are looking for strong indicators of commitments to privacy. So that means you need engaged and empowered compliance officers. If the data protection privacy people are always being ignored, that is visible. People will see that, and that is harmful. The employees are going to say, well, wait a minute, is there a real commitment to these issues or not? You need real implementation of privacy principles as well. They actually need to see it, both within the organization, within the products they're building, with the data used, whatever. They really need to see an actual commitment. This is actually happening. Training aimed at practical application to work, right? This is a problem. So much of the training, and we are still trying to fix this at Palantir 10 years into my working here, so much of training is, here are the FIPS, or here's what GDPR says. Well, what does a coder do with that, right? Proportionality is a great concept, but how does a coder, someone who's sitting there trying to figure out how am I supposed to put this in action, what do they do with that? Training needs to be practical. It needs to say, okay, here's the principle, and here's what you do to actually try to implement that principle. And that can be complicated because we don't always know what to do. Or there may be options to do it. Maybe there's a back and forth because there may be some technical aspects to it. A clear statement of values. Explanations of explanations of actions that may be contrary to those values. What does the company actually stand for? And then what are red lines? Like how are you, when do you cross the line, right? If you articulate a value, we preserve democracy, that's a useless value. Yes, it sounds great and we all want to do that, but you have to give a little bit more. Well, what does that actually mean to preserve democracy? Who do we work with? Who do we not work with, etc. GDPR and other regulations codes, they do play in because they're indicators, right? These are not data protection experts. These are not lawyers. I should say I'm a lawyer. That's partly why my presentation was a bit sarcastic. People who are not experts in these areas, they don't necessarily understand. Privacy is a very difficult concept, as we all know. So they are going to look for regulations and laws. You know, our company, even the American coders in our company are very enamored with GDPR. They sort of see it as, based on sort of popular impression as, okay, this must be a benchmark. This must be right. So they are going to be looking to those, and implementation of those, again, a sign of credible commitment to these issues. And then this is a big one, because this is the number one question I get from new employees, from recruits. Can you give me an example of a time when you pulled away from a relationship with a customer, when you walked out? You have to have a willingness to walk away, and they want to see you walk away from lucrative opportunities. Palantir has walked away from six-figure contracts over privacy. We don't promote this because often it's embarrassing for the people you're working with, and we have confidentiality agreements, so we've done it, and that has given credibility to the work that we've done, or to this. Now, There's recruiting challenges in here as well. Public image can be a problem, as some of you may have know from your research on us. Our public image has some challenges, and that's something we work on with our media team because there's a lot of misunderstandings out there. But again, this commitment to privacy is a significant recruiting tool, and that also means that we're trying to tell the truth here when we're out there. If we are recruiting people and everything we're feeding them is a line, pardon my language, a line of bullshit, when they show up at the company, they're going to see that within about 15 minutes and they're just going to go somewhere else. And that's another thing. I think it's hard sometimes, and I'll disparage myself, lawyers were generally pretty replaceable. Engineers are not. And so the amount of time, effort, and money that goes into recruiting these people, we can't just leave them. So I would say, well, let me leave it at that and come back to takeaways at the end.
So that suggests to me privacy in its practical application is a positive recruitment tool.
Absolutely.
So I have the hardest job, I think, in marketing, because generally marketeers are known as people that just want to take data. And I don't have a reference to Lord of the Rings, but I'm pretty sure if you watch Lord of the Rings, you might be less likely to charge off on your credit card, maybe, or if you shop at Poundland. And I've seen all manner of data insight information. But again, I don't think individuals really fully understand where their data is being given or how it's being used. And when it's handed over to certain people, they don't realise it is going to be then subsequently used by other organisations to make decisions and profile them. There are some moves towards transparency, which are getting better. But I think the problem generally with marketing and for data is how good is your data. And I think, Josh, you said about, is it dirty data? I know you probably weren't. I was thinking about dirty as in it hasn't come from the right source. I don't know what you meant by that. But, if you can't really, if you don't know where your data's come from and you don't know how you can use it, then it's pretty much useless. It's great. Everyone says, oh, it's really secure. It's on this platform. Well, that's great. But how did you collect it? Can you use it for the purposes that you want it to? So a lot of the times, I feel quite sorry for the marketing people or the heads of legal that come to us and say, we've got a really great marketing initiative. We've got all of these particular data sources that we want to use. And this organisation said, they're doing a, I think they call it sandpit thing with the FCA, and it's great, and they're really innovative, and they're going to enrich all of this credit data. But ultimately, do individuals know that where you shop, necessarily how many times you go on holiday? And genuinely, I've seen questionnaires that is basically market research. So do you have a bath or a shower? Do you like reading or watching television? It's blatantly market research, but it's been sold for other purposes, i.e. Profiling, and sometimes for credit referencing decisions. So for us, I think it's really important to take a step back, and it's once you explain to marketing people about if you can get your data to the point where it's gold star data, you know where it's come from and you're safe to use it, then you can go off and run as many campaigns as you want. And if you get challenges, you've got all that documentary evidence behind you, and I'll give you examples where it hasn't gone so well. But in terms of what we really need to do, and I think as an organisation it'd be great to get your input as the DPO, is some things have been going through my head, having heard this, is that just thinking about where do we get our data from. Like Leads are us, are great, and they're giving us all this information, but I did have a few questions because I wasn't quite sure about how they'd collected that data in the first place. So going through and looking at privacy notices, are they relying on consent? Is it true consent? And not just that, but I actually had a look at their website and I wasn't quite sure that I followed through the steps, and it wasn't clear and transparent to me. So it'd be really good to look at, because we are going to be using this for quite big marketing campaigns, it's about 5 million data sets we're going to get a month from them. It's quite a big thing. Also, they told me that it's all consent-based. So again, as the marketing director, I hear consent is a big thing now, but I don't really understand what that consent means and how clear that is. So it'd be really good to have a look at that as well. Also, I had a look at some privacy notices, and it didn't really say that we were allowed to use their data, and I don't know where we're supposed to get that information from as well. So just making sure that if you are taking that data, they might say, we've got consent to share that data, identifying who that data is being shared with as well. And also having proper contractual relationships. We heard earlier, I don't know if it was this session, about the role of controllers, processors and joint controllers. It's been very blurry in terms of how you work, but ultimately if we take our data, I'm assuming that we have to be responsible for that. So if we take it and then use it for marketing, all the fines to date have been to the controllers of that data, not the data sources, although I suspect there'll be some fines coming out for data brokers. So again, it's really important to just make sure that you can demonstrate that you've checked the source of that data and information, that you made sure that you've got those contractual requirements in place. But not just that, you actually test those as well. Because quite often when we've seen fines and we've been involved in investigations, clients have said, hey, but we had a contract. And I was like, that's great. So how many times did you check the privacy notice after you did your first cursory glance of it? How many times did you get notification that the journey had changed, so the transparency requirements had gone, and I didn't realise that we had to. We thought having a contract was fine, and going through that process with them. And that is something that they have embraced, and they've reviewed their data sources. And unfortunately for some organisations, unless you're really lucky to have an organic database, and you're not really sending a lot of marketing, and it's not particularly privacy intrusive, you're on quite shaky ground sometimes when you send emails. Some of the examples of cases that we've been involved in, we had one fine that was in 6 figures, and they'd done millions of marketing, and it was 2 complaints that they got from the regulators, and they said, oh, that's interesting, we've had 2 complaints about you. So we went back and we had question after question after question after question. How many emails you sent, how many were delivered, and how many were opened by those individuals? Right, okay, well, out of those, because of those 2, we're now saying X million worth of email marketing is non-compliant. You had inadequate controls in place to, from a contractual point of view. So from my point of view, as the marketing director, it'd be really good to know what we can set up. You don't have to answer it now because we don't have a lot of time, but looking at what does a good pre-contractual due diligence process look like? What kind of things should you be asking from a third party? And these are all data brokers. Please don't be afraid of asking. I hope no one's here from Experian or any other data broker, but just because they're a large company, it doesn't mean that you don't have the right to ask the questions. Just because they rely on one legal basis doesn't mean that that's your legal basis. And it's very important that you can go back and feel empowered to actually ask that information. Check your contracts. Don't just put in your standard GDPR processor controller clauses, because they won't be appropriate. Include some warranties. So these are promises for people that aren't lawyers, about the quality of the data, that they've had no complaints, there's no investigation, so they don't get big numbers of opt-outs. And also test your terms. Every now and again, go on, if it has to be monthly and you have to get somebody to just do that, to check the journey, to check if they've told you this is our wording, that it hasn't changed, and include it in the contract as well. It won't necessarily stop you as an organisation from getting a fine, but it might give you then contractual remedies against that other party. And I think by having that in place, it's a bit like if you build a car with no brakes, you're going to drive really slowly. If you build a car with brakes, you can be a bit more reckless and do a bit more innovative things because you've got the brakes there to kind of stop you.
So the extra innovation obviously might actually be a good business driver as well, because it might increase the value of what you have in terms of your database, and might also reduce your risk as well. So,
okay, the last case study I'm going to look at is just trying to bring hopefully some of the things that these guys have talked about in terms of the principles and getting people to buy into privacy at a high level, selling it as a recruitment option. How do you actually embed that in practice? Because it sounds really great when you say this is what we should do, but how do you on a day-to-day basis get people to actually buy in that privacy is a good thing and they need to do it as part of their BAU procedure? And so the case study I'm looking at is we were helping a client look at how they would do privacy by design and how they would implement data protection impact assessments properly. Because like probably a lot of people in this room, in the run-up to GDPR last year, the 25th of May, there were those frenzied months of writing your policies, trying to get everyone do their training, everything was sort of going to the 25th of May. And this client had a lovely policy on data protection impact assessments, which set out what a DPIA was, when you should do it, what the procedure should be. They had a suite of DPIA template documents that sort of set out checklist questions and then factual gathering sort of questions, then the risk assessment. They'd rolled out training to every single person in the organisation about GDPR generally, including privacy by design and DPIAs. And then in the following 6 months, absolutely nothing changed. The development guys carried on just being really innovative, working really quickly, not talking to legal. Nobody did a DPIA. Nobody really knew what a DPIA was. Everyone sort of, denied all knowledge of having been trained on privacy by design. So it was great from a sort of legal compliance perspective on the 25th of May. They felt quite confident, we've ticked all these boxes, but actually it wasn't working in practice because people hadn't bought into that privacy would help them in their roles and that privacy was important to their roles. So we were tasked with trying to get that buy-in. And there's no real magic to this, and I'm sure most of you here have come up with similar challenges. it's about trying to look at it from their point of view and trying to work out how they work and what they're trying to achieve and why privacy is important to them. And so you need to listen to them first of all and really know what they do and understand their jobs, because without having that really good understanding of what they're trying to achieve, you can't really support them properly or give them the tools to do what they're doing properly. So we started off with a series of workshops with the team, and we got the CEO to come along to the first one to explain what was important from a data perspective for the business. And they have got data and consumer trust as one of their key values. And so he just stood up for 5 minutes and explained why, from a business perspective, that was a key driver for them, because they were a fintech business. They were wanting people to give them more data. They were doing a lot of analysis on that data. And so if people didn't trust them to give them that data, that was a core asset for that organisation. So we got the senior sponsorship, which really helped. And we then gave them the legal training, which was a bit boring, but told them that this is why we have to do this. We actually legally have an obligation to do this. But that was quite light touch. That was just to give them the context. And then the interesting bit was we had workshops with the product and the engineering teams, to get them to come up with their own privacy by design standards, so that they were tasked with, why is privacy important for your team? What's the impact of what you do on the consumer? What do you think is important in what you're doing for the end product, and how it's then used by the person who's inputting all this data and giving it to you? And so they came up, we didn't impose privacy by design standards on them. They had to come up with their own standards. And because they were bright, engaged people, they came up with some really good privacy by design standards. And we used that as the basis for rolling out training across more of the teams, and which they could write in their language as well, in ways that we as lawyers would never have written them. It was much more sort of easy for them to understand, and just in the kind of tech speak that they would use and understand. So we started off with those design principles, and then we worked with them to work out, well, how can we make sure you're doing DPIAs? Because we know we have to do DPIAs for high-risk processing. How are you going to know when it's high risk? We see your business area as a real gateway for this, because you're changing stuff all the time. You're deciding you want different data. You're deciding you want the way the product works to change. You're deciding where the data goes. So you're kind of a real gateway for DPIAs. But even if it's not a legal requirement to do it, we still want to know what's happening with the data, because we might need to update our ROPA. We might need to update our privacy notice slightly, even if it's not high-risk processing. So again, we tried to work with the team to work out what their current processes were and how we could embed the right questions at the right points for them to do the DPIAs or get help to do the DPIAs. And what transpired from those workshops was that having documents that looked like this did not work at all. They could not engage with that and didn't want that. And so they wanted really quick questions that would take you down a specific tunnel and then bring you to an answer. And so it took a lot of work to get there, but we went through all sorts of scenarios of what they actually do with data and how they make changes and how they do stuff. And then went through those different scenarios with mainly yes/no answers. Just, are you doing this? Yes, no, go here, go there. And try to make those sort of tunnels as short as possible, depending on what scenario you were going down. And that has been, they can use that. That's the way they work a lot of the time. And so building the DPIA process around how they work rather than how we as lawyers work was really key to get them on board with understanding what they had to do and how they had to do it. And so I guess the key takeaway from all of that was just try to shift it around to try to look at it from their perspective. We know what we want to do from a compliance perspective, but we're trying to support and enable people to do their jobs as well as they can. And if they've already bought into privacy, they understand why it's important and they want to deliver a really good product, then it's just a matter of maybe shifting the way we deliver it to make sure that it works with their systems and processes.
So that strikes me as sort of knowing your audience and tailoring your training accordingly, because it's more likely to get buy-in. Whereas if instead what you see is somebody who within 2 minutes of going through very sort of boring training is sort of catching flies because their mouth is open and they're falling asleep. Obviously, you've sort of lost the battle.